There's a dark joke that circulates in South Korea every election season. It goes like this: becoming president is easy, staying out of prison afterward is the hard part. To outsiders, this sounds absurd. South Korea is a developed democracy, a member of the G20, a global cultural powerhouse. And yet, when people look at its modern history, a strange pattern appears. Former presidents investigated. Former presidents impeached. Former presidents imprisoned. So the question almost asks itself, why does this keep happening? Is South Korea uniquely corrupt? Or is something deeper happening beneath the surface of its political system? Supporters of Korea's legal system argue that this pattern is actually a sign of strength. They say Korea is one of the few countries where even the most powerful figures are held accountable. Presidents, once untouchable during authoritarian rule, are now subject to the law like everyone else. From this perspective, prosecutions are not political revenge. They're proof that democracy works. Legal scholars often point out that convictions were not symbolic. They were backed by bank records, testimony from insiders, wiretapped conversations, and long investigations. Courts reviewed the evidence over months, sometimes years. Judges ruled that crimes had been committed: bribery, embezzlement, abuse of power. In this view, the narrative that every president is framed is misleading. Presidents weren't punished because they were presidents. They were punished because they broke the law. But that's only one side of the story. Critics argue that Korea's presidency is structurally unstable. The office concentrates enormous power in one individual: control over prosecutors, intelligence agencies, and appointments. But the moment a president leaves office, that power evaporates completely. There is no gradual transition, no lifelong protection, no neutral legacy phase. What follows, critics say, is a political free-for-all. Rival parties, prosecutors with political ambitions, and media outlets rush to expose wrongdoing, sometimes real, sometimes exaggerated. Investigations often begin immediately after a president steps down. Leaks to the press shape public opinion before trials even start. In this environment, it becomes difficult to separate justice from political vengeance. Some critics go further. They argue that prosecutors themselves are political actors. In Korean political discourse, this concern is often summarized by a provocative phrase, "the Republic of Prosecutors." Critics argue that prosecutors wield disproportionate power, able to investigate, indict, and influence political outcomes with minimal oversight. In this narrative, presidents do not fall because they lose elections, but because they lose protection from prosecutorial authority once their term ends. In Korea, the prosecution has extraordinary authority. They investigate, indict, and direct police operations with limited external oversight. This creates the perception that prosecutors can decide who survives politically and who doesn't. Under this view, presidents don't simply get arrested. They lose political protection, and the system turns on them. Public opinion plays a major role as well. Korean voters hold their leaders to extremely high moral standards. Presidents are not just administrators. They are symbols of national integrity. When those symbols crack, public outrage is swift and unforgiving. Mass protests have repeatedly pushed investigations forward. Citizens demand accountability, not compromise. In Korea's political culture, resignation is not enough. Punishment is expected. The most iconic example is the candlelight protests that followed the impeachment scandal, where millions of citizens gathered peacefully over several months. Supporters view these protests as the ultimate expression of democratic participation, proof that public pressure can hold leaders accountable. Critics, however, warn that such mass mobilization risks turning justice into a popularity contest, where legal processes are driven by emotion rather than evidence. This creates a paradox. The same public that demands strong leadership also demands harsh consequences when leaders fail. Presidents govern under constant pressure, knowing that any scandal could destroy their legacy. Another factor is Korea's rapid democratization. For decades, authoritarian leaders ruled without consequences. When democracy arrived, there was pent-up anger, a desire to finally hold elites responsible. That emotional momentum didn't disappear. It became part of the political culture. As a result, every scandal feels like a reckoning, not just a legal process. Still, defenders of the system push back. They argue that calling prosecutions political revenge undermines the rule of law. They point out that many investigations were initiated under opposing administrations, not friendly ones. They emphasize that courts, not politicians, issued final verdicts. According to this view, the problem isn't that presidents are punished, it's that corruption was normalized for too long. So which interpretation is correct? The uncomfortable answer may be that both are partly true. Korean presidents have committed serious crimes, and Korea's political system is also deeply adversarial. Justice exists, but it operates inside a hyper-polarized environment where every legal action is interpreted through a political lens. This is why the myth persists, not because every president is innocent, but because every prosecution feels political, even when it's legally sound. Until Korea reforms its presidential system, reduces winner-takes-all politics, and limits the extraordinary power of prosecutors, the cycle is likely to continue. Future presidents will promise reform. They will vow to end political revenge. And when their term ends, the same question will return. Was justice served, or was another political chapter written in the courtroom? In South Korea, the presidency doesn't end at the inauguration. It follows leaders long after they leave office, sometimes all the way to prison. In South Korea, the real campaign for survival often begins after the presidency ends. And that reality changes how leaders govern, because every decision is made with one fear in mind, not just losing power, but being judged by the system that comes next. That's why Korean politics doesn't feel like a cycle of elections. It feels like a cycle of reckoning,